Yeah, so your name is Alexander. Alex Datepsych is your Skype
Yeah,
handle.
that's good.
Pretty much close to your blog title as well, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you're located in Europe somewhere, I take it?
Yeah, I'm located in Spain, in Barcelona, actually.
Oh wow, cool. Is that the one right on the Mediterranean, or is it landlocked, or it's?
It is right on the Mediterranean, kind of on the northwest, not on the very south of the Mediterranean, but a little bit up close to France.
Oh, cool. Is Nice far from there? Nice, France?
I think in a car, it might be about 3 hours away. I haven't driven there, so I'm not entirely sure. I know I've flown. Actually, I flew in there, and I think it's about an hour to fly in there. So
Okay.
it might have even been faster than that.
Yeah, it's funny that when I think of that entire coastline there in southern Europe along the Mediterranean, I think of the movie, the franchise Transporter, the Transporter films with Jason Statham.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah,
the whole thing is basically like European Mediterranean coastline porn on
yeah. It
top.
really is. Yeah, a lot of really iconic shots in those movies.
Yeah, I mean they're not award-winning films by any stretch of the imagination, but they do make for great scenery. It's a feast for the eyes. If
Yeah.
you the
I always
Gallery.
liked those a lot, those movies, actually, the Transporter series. I really liked them.
Yeah,
For what they are, I thought they were pretty good.
yeah. Um, Yeah, Jason Statham's in his heyday, he was just I was about to say cranking out a lot of films. In fact, there's one called Crank. That's
One
pretty
called
good.
Crank.
Yeah. Any case, so your area of research and specialty is sort of the confluence of social psychology and dating and male-female relationships, or just
Sure,
psychology.
well, my program is called Research in Behavior and Cognition, which is a program essentially, the field that I'm in that specifically is personality psychology. But the program that I was in, most of the coursework focused on research design and statistics. And as far as dating and attraction, that's something, a personal interest that I'm really interested in, and I'll probably focus a lot more on going into the future.
Okay. So the most recent thing I've seen on your site is an overview of the term AWALT, AWALT. Now, prior to that, there was a term associated with the Manosphere called MGTOW. It doesn't ring
Sure.
fluently as AWALT, but MGTOW. That
Uh-huh.
stands for men going their own way. Um,
Sure.
could you describe both MGTOW and AWALT? Maybe give an overview of these terms in the Manosphere, what they imply or suggest?
Sure. So I think MGTOW, men going their own way, is probably a very large part of the manosphere, a very large subculture within the manosphere, and it's men who have essentially sworn off dating. Perhaps they haven't sworn off in all cases sex entirely, because some of them are actually open to maybe very casual relationships. Some are maybe open to visiting escorts, but typically, in general, these are going to be men who have sworn off dating, who have sworn off marriage, who have sworn off relationships with women.
Okay. Men going their own way. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they become almost like asexual hermits or something. I was sort of under the impression that they were almost going into almost like a monk-like existence of.
Some of them, I think for some of them, actually, yes, that probably does describe it. And in fact, they use monk in their own subculture, in their own terminology. Some of them describe themselves as monks. In fact, I think MGTOW monk is even the name. Some you'll see that if you look at the names they use online on forums and stuff, the way that they describe themselves. So some of them do. They don't want to have sex with women. They don't want to have any relationships at all with women. They'll say, in the workplace, I want to avoid women. I don't want women as friends. So there's kind of a spectrum there. But the core of it, I think, to be MGTOW for these men is swearing off relationships with women.
Okay, and that can look like anything from a guy who's sort of holed up in his apartment, reading, video gaming, maybe working on a sort of self-improvement of an exercise variety, or it could be someone who is not on any sort of path to self-improvement, but they just have a very arm's length relationship with women. Like they don't want to become integrated emotionally into their lives or anything like that. So it can
Right,
also
exactly.
in its own way.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a very broad movement with a lot of different kind of trends or tendencies within it. So it would definitely encompass a lot of different behaviors and a lot of different personalities, different motives for doing that, and probably even different abilities. Probably some of these men have been married in the past. They're able to get a date. They could date women if they wanted to, and they don't want to. And some men probably actually really struggle to get a date at all in the first place, to date women, to make emotional connections, and perhaps that is a motivation for those individuals. So there's a lot of variation, I think, in personality and behavior and what it means for them to be MGTOW.
Yeah, there's a spectrum of sort of credibility as far as, your motivation for avoiding women. It's, I can have all of that, but I choose not to frustrate myself with that and just deal with their nonsense, whatever. Or, you have as well people who, for whom that's sort of a cope, that attitude, right? They can't actually be successful with women, so they try to sort of pretend like they're taking this, I don't know, high-minded Doctor Strange unique path in the world, and they just don't. They're kind of above all that, but they're not really.
Right, exactly. And sometimes people will call MGTOW, they'll say it's not men going their own way, it's men sent their own way. So MISTOW or something, kind of what critics will say to kind of do a little criticism or jab at the movement, basically saying, no, most of these men are men who really struggle to date. And like you said, it's basically a cope for them. As far as how true that is for a majority or a percentage, I couldn't tell you for sure, but definitely describes at least some people within it.
Yeah. I was sort of thrown for a loop by the state of the world in 2020 due to COVID. I was living in the Bay Area at the time, and dating became extremely difficult because there was hardly anywhere to go, really. So you sort of had to leap over that kind of middle ground where you meet someone in a public place and then see if you can become comfortable with them. You sort of have to go directly to, are we going to go to my place or your place? Because a lot of the public spaces were closed then, and so it was sort of it's kind of make or break moment for dating. It's like, can you get laid immediately? Because if not, you're going to be waiting for a while because I don't,
Right.
There's sort of in between methods to remaining in a kind of dating life, and that's kind of knowing people personally, circle of friends method, not the dating profile method or dating app method.
Sure.
But, if you've lived long enough, I reached into my 40s, and if you've lived long enough, a lot of the social circle stuff kind of dries up as far as leads. Anyway, I say that because I think that's how some people sort of happened upon an almost somewhat isolated MGTOW-like existence, and specifically due to COVID. And I haven't fully recovered from that now. Some other things happened wherein I gave up my apartment to move across the country. That didn't work out, and so I'm in this kind of nomadic existence, which also totally frustrates trying to date. There are people that can just come into any town and just go to a bar and just cold approach and make something happen for that one night. There was a time in the past where I would have tried that, but that's pretty difficult actually, and I'm not quite that bold. So just delving into a kind of personal take on this. Yeah, since 2020, I've seen the allure of a MGTOW type of existence, but it was partially imposed by greater circumstances, namely COVID. But that's a little bit of a cope, right? In the near term, let's say it's summer 2020. It's not a cope. You've got a good reason, right? It was a novel coronavirus, novel experience. But 2 years out, if you're still doing that, it's kind of on you. So I take that as well. But anyway,
and habits build upon themselves. So if you're used to behaving in one way for 2 years straight, it's going to be much, much harder to jump back into going to bars or talking to people or even getting back into your normal social circles or any of your habits or anything that you usually did. For example, before COVID, I danced salsa and bachata, and I would do that almost every day, almost every night. I would go out and dance. And of course, COVID closed everything. We had really, really strict quarantines here in Spain. And now that everything is back up again, I just haven't got back into the habit. There's nothing preventing it except for being busy doing other things. But habits are like that. A lot of the time people think of like discipline and motivation, but a lot of what we do is really just habit formation. And if we get into a habit and it's good, great. And then if you break that habit, it can be really difficult to get back into it or get back into that same mode of living, so to speak.
Yeah. So I suppose that you had gotten to know some people who worked at, maybe it's a nonprofit, I wouldn't call it work, at a place where you would do salsa dancing, right? Like it became sort of a social outlet too. what I experienced in 2020 was the kind of music scene, everyone being scattered to the four corners of the earth. Like people left the Bay Area because it became too difficult to try to promote any function, to hold any event. So that kind of, that sort of devastated the social circles I was moving in, and that's sort of indirectly related to dating. Like you go out to see mainly like a group of guy friends, but they know someone, they have a female friend, and you discover people that way. But yeah, so it's hard to get back into a habit, but in some cases you just can't, because that habit involved other strangers' lives who have been upended by experience.
Exactly. Certainly. A great deal of things, especially what you described. And actually, what's interesting, so you had said that you have reached into your 40s and the social circles, they dry up. And that's something that's observed empirically in the research and the statistics. When people are young, when they're 18, they're 20, in their early 20s, that sort of thing, they have a large group of friends. All throughout college, they have a very, very large group of friends. And little by little, the older you get, the more that group of friends shrinks. And that's very, very, very consistent for most people. And usually what happens for most people, we also see the amount of singles decreases into the 30s. So by the time we hit mid 30s, for example, there's only about 20 to 30% of people who are still single, as opposed to about 50 to 60% when you're between like 18 and 25. So there's fewer singles. The group of friends becomes smaller, and that's kind of just a normal pattern for everybody in general. And so it gets increasingly difficult to meet people, especially through social circles like you described.
Yeah. And I've noticed as well, if you're interested in dating people that are basically your age, it's going to be unavoidable that, at least for, straight men, their experience, that there are women who might have had kids, who've been married, makes them kind of jaded. You meet people with baggage, and even if you've never been married or had any kids, you've accumulated baggage just through a kind of work-a-day experience over the years, and you just become, it's cynical, I think. But yeah, so social circles dry up. There's a kind of a sapping of I think enthusiasm over time. It's sort of a dating demoralization sets in, at least low key.
Yeah.
So AWALT, AWALT, that's the new terminology going around. What's that about?
Sure. So AWALT is an acronym that stands for All Women Are Like That. And it's, instead of describing one concrete thing, it's kind of a phrase used in the Manosphere. Specifically, I think this originated in the red pill Manosphere, and it might have even originated with a man named Rollo Tomassi, who wrote a book called The Rational Male, who is responsible for a lot of those terms and those things that really, really caught on, kind of like one of the grandfathers of the red pill, so to speak. And essentially, the idea, I think, is basically just stereotyping. It's basically, if a woman behaves a certain way, and the red pill, which is kind of designed to supposedly explain female nature. So if they say, women are like this, the idea is they say AWALT, all women are like this, and men are supposed to take it as kind of a rule or assume as a general principle that any woman they date is going to behave that way. So, for example, an example of AWALT, in the red pill, they say women are hypergamous. Women will leave you if they get the opportunity to pick a better man, to have a relationship with a better man. And so maybe someone will say, no, that doesn't apply to all women. And the red pill people will say, no, stop. All AWALT, all women are like that. And if they literally mean all women are like that, probably not in a lot of cases, but in some, yes. But some of them will say, okay, look, we know that it's not literally all women, but you should treat it like it is all women. Essentially assume that, and it will help you as kind of a strategy or a dating rule in your life. So two different ways to look at it there.
It's almost like the the bitter male version of the Me Too movement's all men, or I think the terminology was not all men, right? I don't think all men was a hashtag. It might have been. I think not all men became a hashtag, and that was basically in response to the kind of a female version of what you just said. Like, okay, well, it's not literally every man, but come on, bumper sticker type. Sure. Can't capture every nuance, but it basically is. Yeah, it basically is all men. So it's interesting. Do you remember a guy named Mystery from the?
Sure.
Yeah.
Usually one of the earliest pickup artists to popularize everything, basically. Yeah. Sure.
The 2000s is when this kind of Manosphere thing began percolating, and in this instance on VH1, the cable network. There was a show, I believe it was on VH1, hosted by, or at least he was the main character, Mystery, and he would teach a bunch of like hapless, nerdy guys how to approach women.
Sure, sure.
My girlfriend at the time, we would watch that, and we were always baffled by that guy being the kind of go-to guru on this. Because even at the time, he looked sort of silly, like almost like a caricature of a Burning Man attendee or raver, right? But how do you think the discussion around manosphere or the plight of men has changed since that time? Or do you have any sort of timeline in your head of the how this has unfolded since?
Certainly, and actually, interestingly, there are two studies that I know of that have essentially looked at through network analysis, kind of the development of the whole manosphere, from pickup artistry to red pill to MGTOW. And what they've done is they basically tracked accounts across social media, across different forums associated with different movements, across different pickup forums, different forums related to incels, to MGTOW, across Twitter, for example. And they've seen this progression. And if we look back, like you said, I believe around 2005, and so perhaps even, yeah, I think it would have started when they began collecting the data, or when they would have looked at the earliest accounts, I should say. We saw more people involved in that pickup community, people essentially that wanted to date, but maybe they were frustrated and they were looking for a solution. So they go to people like Mystery or to these other very popular pickup artists. Perhaps they go to the early red pill communities. And then over time, we see that participation in those communities has decreased, and participation in what have been described as more extreme communities, communities like incels, like MGTOW, have actually increased. So it's interesting. It's almost like, and you can even track the same accounts that have like left and gone into these other communities. So it's almost like they tried pickup, it didn't work for them, or they became disillusioned or something, and whatever. They've gravitated to this other thing that's essentially within the manosphere, believes similar things about women and female nature, but takes a whole different approach. Like, no, I don't even want to deal with women anymore. I'm going to swear it off, women. So kind of that progression, I think the whole manosphere has kind of progressed in that direction, where we definitely see the most popular thing that I have seen grown a lot, and I couldn't give you data on it, but just as what I have personally observed over the last few years is the growth in what's called the black pill. And the fundamental nucleus of the black pill is basically that physical looks matter, facial looks matter. It's the most important thing, and anything else is secondary. And then there's a lot of periphery in the black pill. But it seems like that ideology has grown a whole lot in the last few years, whereas traditionally red pill would have said looks, status, game, income, those sorts of things. So it conceded, okay, there's a lot of other things that women find attractive that you can do to improve yourself. And black pill is more fatalistic, more deterministic, perhaps nihilistic in extreme cases, where it says your looks are almost purely genetic. They determine almost all of your success. You're either a Chad and you're going to make it with women, or it's over for you. You're never going to make it. Yeah.
I wonder if that has to do with the increasingly kind of siloed existence of a lot of men, living the so-called pod life. They don't really have any kind of real life feedback. They're not enmeshed in any kind of organic community. So they have this really kind of deracinated view of what you need to get women. Just looks, really?
Yeah.
Like looks, income, that's it. It's like it's odd coming from so I'm a young Gen Xer, and I used to promote music. It's always involved in the music scene, and so that's just where you find women to date. You have this because there's a woman. You have this thing external to you, involvement in the scene, preference for this kind of music. In my case, it was sort of like electronic music, and then that's how you end up getting together. Culture is involved there. It's not as if you're like this isolated, good-looking or not person with money or not person. Then you could add something like you actually have an apartment to go to. You have your own place. That stuff matters a lot. Yeah, it can be logistically worked out, but there's this weird like culturalist view to the black pill, where it's like you're nothing but the numbers on a sort of dating profile resume, which is odd because even the dating apps, when you fill out so many things that pertain to your personality and your interests, that I guess the black pill notion would suggest none of that matters at all. It's only how good you look in pictures. I mean, but that doesn't really comport with real life, I think.
Exactly. And even for online dating, we know from research on Tinder that, for example, men who have a degree in their Tinder profile get about 3 times as many swipes. So what the black pill gets right, especially about online dating, is that physical looks are the most important thing. And I think, of course, these are very, very visual apps, but they exaggerate the effect a lot. They exaggerate the extent of it, and they exaggerate essentially how difficult it is for men who are not in the top 10 or 20% of men it is to get a date. Because most men who actually use online dating apps are still getting dates. About 40% of Americans, for example, in relationships report getting in a relationship through an app. So it's very, very common. And I think what you said actually about them being like kind of
giga chads, and yet somehow it's working out. Right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. When you look at the actual numbers, people in relationships, even the people that get matches on apps, there was a Pew survey from 2019 that asked online daters, representative, as the Pew tends to do, of the whole United States. And it found about 77% of online daters reported getting a date. About 40% of online daters reported getting a relationship from the app, which is pretty high, which actually is similar to the 40% of Americans in a relationship from the app. We kind of see a parallel statistic there. So it's certainly not just this sliver of men. And the more I have observed the black pill in these forums and discourse online, social media, watching the videos, eventually, at first they said it was about 30% of men. I say it's about 20%. And now people are like, it's only 5% of men. Only 5% of men are having sex. No one else is having sex. So there's kind of like this slope. There's like this slide into more and more extreme views where more and more exaggeration in a way.
Yeah, I can see how the age of app-driven dating does lend itself to a black pill view, because you are sort of like, it is like the like a resume, the reductionist way that a resume in the job market would present somebody applied to dating. So you do become sort of like this. There's an idea of you that precedes you, and that's something that you can read in certain like statistics. When you're applying for jobs, you know, like you've worked here from that time to that time, that period there. You might mention how much money you made. So you are just kind of information on a paper, which can miss the nuance of reality in a certain sort of IRL in terms of dating, a kind of IRL synergy that isn't captured by just looking at their stats. So the kind of profilicity, to use a term that there's a philosopher in China, he's a Dutch guy, I think, or a German guy. He has a YouTube channel called Carefree Wandering. He's tried to.
Oh, I know. Good. He's a good guy. Yeah.
He talks a lot about this notion of profilicity, which he contrasts with prior ages of authenticity and sincerity. So profilicity is like, you go into the world expecting to engage people, taking into account that they see you as a profile. So you orient yourself around that first. And that is, I can see how that lends itself to a kind of black pill view where you have to look good. You have to, your stats have to line up. And in other words, the idea of you and just, the actual physical you're reduced to those two things, and you miss the chance to sort of express your, the timbre of your personality, the things that are not quite legible. It's harder to get that across.
And that's something in the black pill they discuss a lot. They say it's a lot harder now than it used to be.
That's true.
As far as how hard it is now, it probably is harder now in a lot of ways. Is it as hard as they think it is? I tend to think it's probably not quite as extreme as they think it is, but I think they're not entirely wrong. All of these manosphere ideologies, it's not like they just invented out of thin air. They do kind of have a core nucleus of truth about things that they get right. And of course, people believe different things. There's a lot of variation. So some will exaggerate that more and some will kind of temper it in more. But as far as it being more difficult now for men than it has been in the past, I think so. Also, another thing, a lot of these very young men, because these black pill part of the manosphere is very, very young men. And I think if you look at, for example, demographics on subpopulations that like incels, you see that they skew very young, but also a lot of these big YouTubers that have these black pill channels, they've shared their demographics, and you see these are men who are like in their teens to 25, the most of the population that view these channels.
Yeah.
So a lot of these young men have never had any real experience with social circles outside. They base a lot of what they believe on on social media, on their interactions through apps, through TikTok and things like that. Some of these giant black pill channels and Manosphere channels now are dedicated basically to, they'll put a TikTok video up and then they'll be like, oh, look, this is how women are. And it's like, okay, this is how one person on TikTok is who is basically like playing a character and gets a bunch of likes and stuff. Is that really representative of most women? Probably not, but that's what they see day to day. And the people on TikTok, they see that they're successful as well. The men, for example, these are men who all look like models. They're men who have perfect bodies. The successful men on TikTok, they're very charismatic. You know, this is basically what media and acting is now. And they think, how can I compare myself to that? How could I ever be like that? It's not like they're going to school, to university, and they're just seeing a normal selection of men as often. That's actually another thing, is that a lot of these men who struggle to date, they're less likely to be in university. They're less likely to be employed. They're more likely to be living at home. So they are really kind of isolated individuals, at least within that part of the manosphere that really gets attracted to the black pill.